Good morning. Thanks for being here. I'm Stephen Romo.
And I'm Zinklea Asamoah in Washington, D.C. Joe and Savannah are off this morning. Right now on Morning News Now, back on track. Breaking this morning, President Biden announcing a tentative deal to avoid what would be a crippling railroad shutdown. Now freight rail workers set to vote on the 11th hour agreement just hours after threatening to strike.
Who would be impacted by a strike?
Basically everybody. You know, what moves on the rails is everything related to manufacturing, warehouse, distribution, even closed.
We have late-breaking information on the hours of negotiations and the crucial call the president made to get this deal done. Fit for a queen this morning, a massive showing on the streets of London, still growing by the minute. Tens of thousands of people lining up for miles, expecting to wait for hours to pay their final respects to Queen Elizabeth as she lies in state ahead of her funeral next week. We'll have more on that. Plus, King Charles is set to spend a quiet day in mourning after yesterday's grand procession. All of the latest just ahead. Also this morning, high-stakes summit, a historic meeting with potentially world-changing consequences. Russian President Vladimir Putin set to meet his Chinese counterpart for the first time since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And increased tensions in Taiwan. More on the deepening partnership that's raising global concerns. And finally, purpose over profit, a major move by the founder of one of the biggest outdoor retailers to give away his billion-dollar business in the name of climate change. How he says he's making Mother Nature Patagonia's only shareholder, and why the move could redefine how other business owners view corporate leadership. And Stephen, I'm sad I can't be sitting next to you today, but it's good to see you there in New York.
I know. It is great to see you as always. And Clay, we'll keep it fun this morning, even through that distance.
Absolutely. And we begin this morning with that breaking news on the tentative deal to avert a potential strike and major shutdown of railroads across the country.
Yeah, a lot of eyes on this one. The White House announcing earlier this morning an agreement in place between the railroad companies and two labor unions that were threatening to strike if a new contract was not reached by midnight. President Biden saying in a statement that the deal is, quote, an important win for our economy and the American people. We have full coverage of these developments in just a moment. Rick Newman, a senior columnist at Yahoo Finance, on how critical a deal was to helping protect the economy. But we begin with NBC News technology correspondent Jake Ward and NBC News White House correspondent Mike Memoli. Good morning to both of you. And we begin with Mike. We'll start off asking about what more we know about this deal and how the White House was able to reach this agreement at the last minute.
Well, Stephen, we expect to learn some more details about the particular terms of the agreement when Labor Department officials hold a media availability later this morning. The president saying in a statement announcing the agreement this morning that it's going to lead to improved pay and working conditions for the union workers here. But it is significant. The Labor Department was hosting both the management and union representatives throughout the day yesterday. I'm told in the end there were 20 hours of consecutive negotiations leading to an agreement. And President Biden playing a crucial role with a phone call to both sides late last night around 9 p.m. The agreement followed in the hours that came after. Now, President Biden in that statement calling this a win for tens of thousands of rail workers who worked tirelessly through the pandemic to ensure that America's families and communities got deliveries of what kept us going during these difficult years. He also called it a win for the freight rail companies, saying they're now going to be able to attract the kind of talent workers to keep them on the rails. Now, this was going to affect not just freight rail, but passenger rail. Amtrak yesterday had announced they were canceling a number of their long distance routes. And so an important win for the White House at a time they were really concerned about another economic blow.
And all down to the wire. Jake, if you could walk us through what got us to this point in the first place. What were the issues at heart of this negotiation? And are there any sticking points left?
Well, fundamentally, Steve, we're talking here about, as Mike has mentioned, really the backbone of the economy. 40% of what you and I buy on the grocery store shelves depend on rail traffic to get there. And so the stakes really could not have been higher. As Mike mentioned, we don't know yet exactly what the carriers and the unions have agreed to here. Neither of them are commenting yet. We only know this because the White House has announced it. But the terms here the negotiation here had everything to do with working conditions. According to the unions, there had been basically a shift in the last few years that began to make what was already an extraordinarily demanding job. When you sign on to work for the railroads, you are signing on to be within reach of your phone and to be within range of your job every day of the year. It's an emergency-based sort of employment. But what rail workers were saying was that because in the last few years there had been a reduction in the workforce, that companies had been shedding workers. One report from the Surface Transportation Board shows that about 29% fewer workers in the industry over the past 6 years, and the unions had essentially said that they were doing pre-pandemic levels of rail traffic with only about 80% of the workforce, and that added up, they said, to a very stern system, a strict system that penalized them for even trying to go to the doctor. One of the things they were asking for was unpaid sick leave, not just paid sick leave, unpaid sick leave. They wanted 15 days that they could rely on to be able to go to the doctor without having to take that time out of their, sleeping schedule was what it was down to. Otherwise, they would have been penalized under several new programs that had been instituted that would, basically points programs. So these were really fundamental questions about the quality of life for these workers. They say it was making things just untenable. I'll also mention here quickly that, these companies have seen a 600% increase in profit since 2004. That's something unions had really pointed at, but the carriers had said, those are mostly about investments. It's not about labor, and so said that it shouldn't really be part of this. So really, two sides very much at loggerheads. It is amazing that we have come to this point, Stephen.
I think so many people don't realize how demanding these jobs actually are. So, Mike, from a political standpoint, how important was this for the White House to solve this and avoid a strike?
Well, Stephen, I tell you, Biden administration officials really feel like since the president took office last year, it's been one crisis after another. And you think about the other supply chain crisis they inherited early on, having to deal with ocean shipping that only has recently become to be resolved. And so at a time when the administration has really been celebrating a run of legislative successes, you saw the president with multiple events this week, again, touting the Inflation Reduction Act, the infrastructure law. This really threatened to upset that momentum at a critical moment. We know the midterm elections now less than 8 weeks away. And so this really removes what would have been a major economic blow at a really brutal time for the administration. And the White House already this morning touting the fact that President Biden's approval ratings continue to tick up. A new poll from the Associated Press has his approval rating now at 45%, up from the mid-30s just a month ago.
A lot of things changing really fast as those midterms inch closer. Mike Mimley, Jake Ward, thank you both.
Now let's bring in Yahoo Finance senior columnist Rick Newman for more on how a potential strike could have impacted an already fragile economy. Good morning, Rick. So I want to jump in and talk about the latest consumer price index report out this week. It showed that inflation rose more than expected last month. So what kind of impact would a strike have had on these already sky-high prices?
It would have made inflation worse. And it's not necessarily gas prices, which is probably the one single consumer product that people pay the most attention to. Just because everybody sees those prices advertised everywhere, it would have been other types of energy. So there's a lot of coal that gets transported by rail. If you have less coal, that means utilities are going to be using more natural gas, and those prices have been going up. Ethanol, almost all ethanol gets transported by rail. That's an important additive in gasoline. There's some oil and oil products. Mostly this would have been industrial products that would have passed through higher costs to consumer products and done it fairly quickly. So Biden must make this deal stick. He needs this deal in place, especially given that the midterm elections are less than 2 months away.
And, Rick, I know that before the news of an agreement being reached, the American Farm Bureau Federation expressed their concerns over a potential stoppage. So talk to us about some of the challenges farmers and ranchers would have faced.
Think about energy. Let's talk about natural gas for a moment. People do not pay close attention to the cost of natural gas because you don't see it anywhere. I mean, nobody looks at the fine print on their utility bills, or at least most people don't. Natural gas prices right now are twice what they were 1 year ago. And that is really important because a lot of utilities use natural gas to produce electricity. It takes a lot of energy to produce food, to transport food, and to produce a lot of other things in the system. And when energy costs go up, which they have done, and they're probably going to stay there for the next several months into the winter. That raises the cost of many products, and it does it in a way that people can't really see. So if you see, food prices are up 13% year over year. That is one of the most important drivers of inflation right now. And that has a lot to do with energy. There are other factors, not enough workers in the system and things like that. But energy is one of the biggest concerns with regard to inflation right now. And it's not gasoline. It's other types of energy where you don't really see the price.
And I mean, Rick, you've talked about gasoline a few times, so we should touch on it. Obviously, we've seen gas prices improve dramatically across the country over the past few months. The national average now at $3.69 a gallon, according to AAA. And that's down from that $5 high we saw back in June. I was out at a gas station when we hit that record. So how does the news this morning affect drivers specifically? Would a strike have caused these prices to go back up again?
Yeah. So like I mentioned before, ethanol makes up about 10% of gasoline, and that does travel mostly by rail. So if there had been disruptions in ethanol supplies, that probably would have caused problems for gasoline and pushed prices up a little bit. Now, we're not going to have that problem right now, but I think there's a good case that gasoline prices are about as low as they're going to go. I'm not sure that drivers are going to get much more of a break. This has to do, obviously, with the global price for oil. We don't get to set oil prices. They're set in a global market. They've actually been ticking up a little bit lately. The war in Ukraine remains a huge issue with regard to oil supplies in the world. It seems far away to many Americans, but, if there's a disruption of oil supply from Russia or any country of just 1 to 2% of the global supply, that is going to push prices up. So we've got a really nice set of relief during the last 3 months. I fill up my tank, and I love seeing that price fall below $4. I don't know that we're going to get much lower than we are right now, though.
Okay, a lot to watch out for drivers. Rick Newman, thank you.
Bye, guys.
Now the latest on the investigation into the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows has reportedly complied with a subpoena from the Justice Department. According to what multiple sources familiar with the matter have told CNN, Meadows turned over the same materials he previously gave the House Select Committee investigating that attack. Those materials include emails and text messages between Election Day of 2020 and the day President Biden was inaugurated. It's unclear whether the DOJ will seek more material from Meadows, potentially leading to a legal fight over executive privilege.
Now to the latest on the memorial of Queen Elizabeth II. Crowds spent the night in miles-long lines for a chance to say one final goodbye to the monarch. This is a live map showing the line of tens of thousands of mourners waiting to file through Westminster Hall for the first full day of her lying in state. Right now, it's nearly 4 miles long. Meanwhile, King Charles III is expected to have a day away from public duties and events for reflection. For more on this, let's bring in NBC News foreign correspondent Molly Hunter live from London. Molly, good to see you. So hundreds of thousands are expected to say their farewells and pay their respects in the following days. And that enormous line of people is being talked about around the world, understandably. 4 miles, that is very long. And I understand that even the first 3 people in that line got a wristband to signify sort of the significance of this moment. So talk to us about what you've seen and what we can expect to see today.
Yeah, Zinkley, good morning. And you hear the kind of, if you hear the laughter, the noises behind me, it's because the line, the epic long queue, I'm just looking at it, they're just crowding towards the bridge. They are moving very, very quickly right below me. So as you said, there is an app that Londoners can check to see. Right now it's about 4 miles. We are told by people at this stage, and we're just across from Westminster Hall, they queue on this side, cross the bridge, head into Westminster Hall. It's about 2.5 hours to here, 45 more minutes. So it is not the 10-mile long line, the 30-hour wait that was expected. But take a quick listen, to what a couple people said about waiting in that line.
She was the glue, what knitted the monarchy together, really, wasn't she?
You're always guiding us as a moral standard, and a part of the reason I come to this country. So I didn't actually know she meant that much to me.
And Zinkley and Steve, everyone is saying this is the least they feel they can do. They will wait for as long as it takes. Now, we'll see if the crowds get bigger, of course, over the weekend when people aren't working. But it's certainly not as backed up as was expected.
Not as backed up, but I still love that you can see the line from where you are. That's amazing, Molly. And I also know that President Biden spoke to King Charles III yesterday to offer his condolences on the passing of his mother, the Queen. What can you tell us about that conversation?
Yeah, we have a short readout. Zinkley, I'll just read a tiny bit of it. It says the president recalled fondly the Queen's kindness and hospitality, including when she hosted him and the First Lady at Windsor Castle last June. He also conveyed the great admiration of the American people for the Queen, whose dignity and constancy deepen the enduring friendship and special relationship between the two countries. Zinkley, we are meeting a lot of Americans here who say exactly that. The Queen was not just the Queen of the United Kingdom or of the Commonwealth. Americans, and I am sure you guys have been talking about this too, feel a real fondness for the monarch and for the 70 years that she reigned.
A lot of solidarity around the world. Molly Hunter, thank you.
And for more on this, let's bring in NBC News British historian Andrew Roberts. Andrew, good morning to you. If you would, give us the broad view here. Do these miles-long lines have any comparison in modern times? And have people in the UK ever sort of turned out in numbers like this?
Never before in the numbers that are expected. I think that, of course, this is a Thursday. You wait till the weekend when people have time on their hands. That's when they're going to be coming from all over the country to join this queue. I shouldn't be surprised if it stretches to Bermondsey. The authorities are ready for that to happen. They're speeding it up much faster. And as you can see, they're going on both sides of the cataract, which is a very sensible way to speed the whole thing up. But to look at it historically, I just found one sentence from a report of Winston Churchill's lying in state. And it's a rather beautiful piece of writing. What the journalist said was, 2 rivers run silently through London tonight, and one is made of people. Dark and quiet as the nighttime Thames itself, it flows through Westminster Hall. So we have seen this before. We saw it with Winston Churchill in 1965, but you have to go back that far to see a precedent like this.
So striking to see all of those people willing to line up and wait. And what do we think about the way people are mourning? And what do you think this says about modern Britain and its relationship with the Crown?
Well, it's obviously got a very strong and ancient relationship with the Crown that goes back the concept of monarchy 1,000 years. So in that sense, it's an essential part of the self-identity of the nation. With regard to looking forward, it's much more difficult. One has to look at the King Charles III and see the ways in which he's going to try to continue the traditions of his mother.
A lot still to come on that. Thank you so much for your insight, Andrew Roberts.
Now let's turn back to the U.S. for the latest on Tropical Storm Fiona and get a check of your Morning News Now weather.
Meteorologist Michelle Grossman joins us now for more on that. Good morning, Michelle.
Good morning. Good to see you both. And we are looking at our 6th named storm of the Atlantic season. It was a slow start, but we're getting there. We're at the peak season, and we are looking at our 6th named storm. So here's the latest information. Became a tropical storm overnight. It was Tropical Depression 7, now Tropical Storm Fiona, 580 miles east of the Leeward Islands. It's moving at 13 miles per hour, so that's pretty quick. And we're seeing winds at 50 miles per hour. We do anticipate that it's going to stay a tropical storm and sort of entering conditions that aren't great for strengthening, so we do expect it to stay at this strength a little bit higher. So as we go throughout time here, by Friday into Saturday, we're going to see it impacting the northern parts of the Leeward Islands, and then by Sunday into the Virgin Islands, into Puerto Rico, into Hispaniola by Monday into Tuesday, and then it could impact the Bahamas early next week before it takes that turn to the right. So we have a big area of high pressure. That's a steering current, and we're going to see it move off to the west and also the north. Hopefully that will help steer it away from the East Coast, and that's what we're thinking as of right now. Now back closer to U.S., we are looking at some rain in the northern plains. We're looking at some rain also in parts of the central part of the nation. So that's a big story today in terms of any storms. We're looking at severe weather possible in the central and southern plains. Also looking at some storms in Florida as we go throughout the afternoon to evening hours. We saw that yesterday. We saw it the day before. We're going to see it once again today. So your severe weather threat for today, we could see winds gusting up to 60 miles per hour. That could cause some damage. Also some hail. It's a low risk, but still not zero. Same with the tornado risk. We're looking at a low risk. The major concern here will be heavy downpours and also some winds. But it's extending from the northern plains into the central plains, parts of the southern plains. So basically Amarillo into Dodge City and also Grand Island. This is the setup. We have an area of low pressure. It's a slow-moving front, nearly stationary, but not quite parked. So it's moving slowly through hot and humid air. That's going to spark the chance for some storms as it slides through the plains. Strong storms from Texas and Nebraska. And that will be mainly later on this afternoon into the evening hours. Tomorrow, still moving really slow. We're looking at heavy downpours possible in the upper Midwest. We could see 1 to 3 inches of rain, maybe a little bit higher as we go throughout the afternoon hours. And rainfall rates could be 1 to 2 inches per hour. So as we look towards Florida, we're seeing a stationary front also moving very, very slowly. That's the name of the game. That's what we saw the past few days. So we're going to see this interacting with some sea breeze. That's going to develop soaking storms once again. We're going to see the chance for some flooding rains. Locally, heavy rain. Flooding is possible once again. And then tomorrow, not moving really far. It moves a little bit to the north, but look at all these heavy cells of really heavy downpours from Tampa to Orlando and also Miami. So a tough go in terms of travel there. We're going to see some ponding on the roadways. Rainfall forecast 1 to 3 inches generally. Could see a little higher amounts, 2 to 4 inches in some spots, especially within some of those thunderstorm cells. We could see some pretty heavy downpours. Now, in terms of the temperature, picture perfect. Really nice September weather in the Northeast, the Mid-Atlantic, also portions of New England. But, Stephen, we are looking at really hot conditions still. Feeling like summer with just a few days left with temperatures in the 90s.
Wow, a lot to keep track of. I know you'll watch Fiona for us.
Yeah.
We'll check back in on that one. Michelle,
Thank you so much. And coming up on Morning News Now, global concern over what could be a deepening partnership between Russia and China.
When we come back, we'll tell you about the high-stakes meeting between the two countries' presidents and how it could impact the war in Ukraine.
We're back. An overseas Chinese president Xi is set to meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin for the first time since February. The two leaders are in Uzbekistan at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit. This is Xi's first trip overseas since the start of the pandemic, and there's a lot at stake. He's seeking to consolidate his power with a historic third term, and Putin is facing backlash and isolation from the West over the invasion in Ukraine. NBC News foreign correspondent Raf Sanchez joins us now from Taipei to talk about this. Raf, good morning. So a lot has happened since the last time Xi and Putin met in February. If I break it down, they declared their partnership, quote, without limits, and called it a new era in international relations. And the war in Ukraine is not going as well as Putin had hoped. So given all that, what are we expecting from today's meeting? And do you expect their stand on Western relations to be more toned down this time around?
Good morning, good evening from here in Taipei. This is a really important meeting for both of these leaders for the reasons that you just laid out. The war in Ukraine is not going Putin's way on the battlefield, and he is really eager to show the world, but also the Russian people, that he is not isolated on the world stage, that he has friends, that he has allies, and there is no more important friend and ally than China, this rising authoritarian superpower. For Xi, he is heading into a critical couple of weeks. The Chinese Communist Party Congress is meeting in mid-October. They are expected to rubber stamp that unprecedented third term for him, making him the most powerful Chinese leader since Chairman Mao. But Xi has been walking kind of a delicate diplomatic line when it comes to Ukraine. He has been rhetorically supporting Russia. China has been voting with Russia at the UN. China has been amplifying Russian propaganda about NATO, but it has not sent military aid to Russia. It's certainly not sent troops to fight on the battlefield. And the Chinese are very closely watching what's happening in Ukraine to see what lessons they might learn if they were ever to launch an invasion here in Taiwan, and especially what kind of mistakes have the Russians made on the battlefield that they could avoid here. So people all around the world, and especially here in Taipei, are very closely watching this meeting, going to see what sort of statements come out of it later. Sinclair?
Understandably closely watching it, and you touched on it. We know Taiwan is a major point of contention for China. It has vowed to, quote, unify with Taiwan and threatened to take it by force if necessary. And just yesterday, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee here in the U.S. approved a bill to boost ties with Taiwan and give it more military weapons to stave off a Chinese invasion or a potential one. So how could the outcome of Russia's invasion in Ukraine influence what may happen in Taiwan?
Yeah, exactly. There are a lot of parallels here, right? Taiwan, Ukraine are both smaller democracies living in the shadow of much larger authoritarian neighbors with vastly superior militaries. We actually interviewed the former head of the Taiwanese military, and he said Ukraine can learn a lot of lessons, take a lot of inspiration from the way the Ukrainians have fought asymmetrical warfare against the Russians. Taiwan is 23 million people. China is more than 1 billion. Taiwan is never going to be able to compete in a conventional war, but it may be able to use very mobile, agile units to hit the Chinese and get out of the way before the Chinese can respond. The Admiral Lee called this the Muhammad Ali strategy, and I want you to take a listen to a little bit of what he had to say about it.
But from the Ukraine war's example, the lesson we can learn that the asymmetrical capability is so effective to defend yourself, especially when you are weaker and small countries.
Sinclair, in terms of putting that asymmetrical warfare into practice, he said one of the things Taiwan needs to do is wean itself off of those really big-ticket American military hardware items. So that's F-16 fighter jets, its tanks, its warships, and instead focus on the kinds of weapons that the Ukrainians have used so effectively against Russia. Specifically, he mentioned those anti-ship missiles, which the Ukrainians used to sink the Moskva. That's the flagship of the Russian Black Sea Fleet. He said if China were to ever launch a kind of D-Day style invasion of Taiwan, try to land its forces on the beaches here, those kinds of missiles would be absolutely devastating as the Chinese fleet draws near. Sinclair.
Raf Sanchez in Taipei, thank you.
In other international news this morning, Ukrainian President Zelensky is getting a look at the damage in towns recaptured by Ukrainian forces.
That's right. NBC News foreign correspondent Janice Mackey-Frayer joins us now with more on that and other stories making news around the world. Good morning, Janice.
Good morning. Ukrainian President Zelensky visited the eastern part of the country where Russian forces had retreated after capturing territory there, but they left behind towns and villages that had been devastated. There's also a major effort underway to try to repair a dam that had been hit by Russian shelling, a move criticized by Ukrainian officials who say that they targeted something that had no military value but is essential to people. Here in China, millions are bracing for torrential rain and floods as Typhoon Muefa makes landfall, with gale force winds reaching 100 miles per hour and waves churning as high as 15 feet. It's being called the strongest tropical cyclonic storm to hit eastern China in a decade, and it's heading towards Shanghai. That's where flights have been canceled and container ports have been forced to shut down. And finally, talk about a duet. In Italy, the world's first synchronized aerobatic flight and cliff dive, and it was set to music. Stunt pilot Dario Costa teamed up with a select group of high divers, and they did this all over the Adriatic. Check out this precision. When the diver would hear the plane coming, they would jump from the platform just as Costa pulled up sharply. It was not leaving a lot of time to nail photos and videos, and probably why everyone involved was calling it, quote, perfect harmony. And that's a look at some of the stories making headlines today.
Incredible to see that timing alone. All right, Janice, thanks so much.
And coming up, a new perspective on the deadly withdrawal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan. We've got a look at a new documentary using never-before-seen footage to shed light on what went wrong 1 year ago.
Plus, guilty again. Singer R. Kelly now convicted in a series of additional charges and facing even more time behind bars. The latest next on Morning News Now. Welcome back. A federal jury in Chicago has handed down another swath of convictions to disgraced R&B singer R. Kelly. On Wednesday, Kelly was found guilty on 6 counts of charges related to child pornography. The verdict is the latest legal blow to the artist, who is already serving a 30-year prison sentence stemming from a separate case litigated here in New York. Prosecutors say these convictions are another step in the right direction.
We are pleased with the fact that Robert Kelly is finally being held accountable for that reprehensible conduct. we are particularly pleased that Robert Kelly is finally being held responsible for the abuse of his 14-year-old goddaughter. As you may recall, that was the subject of the 2008 trial in Cook County. And the jury in this case found him guilty of that very same conduct.
A lot of disturbing stuff here. NBC News correspondent Ron Allen joins us with more on that conviction. And Ron, good morning to you. So if you could, we already know about this 30-year sentence that was litigated here in New York. How could this new verdict affect that at all?
Well, he's going to be sentenced for these latest crimes. He faces 10 to 90 years in prison. And the prosecutors have said that they want this sentence to run consecutively to the 30-year sentence. In other words, back to back. They say to essentially honor that each of the victims, the women who came forward, is a separate case, therefore not to run concurrently. And also in case Kelly appeals, so that he basically, they are determined to keep him in prison for the rest of his life. We'll get a sentencing date at some point soon. This case in Chicago is different from the New York case. The New York case, the uniqueness of it was a racketeering charge. They charged him you charge mob bosses of running a criminal enterprise that was all about him, about his sexual gratification. This case in Chicago was targeted at the testimony and the abuse allegations raised by 5 young women, including, as you heard the prosecutor say, Kelly's goddaughter, who was 14 at the time. She's now a woman in her late 30s. And she and 4 other women came forward, as was the case in New York, after all these years to tell their truth and tell their story. Listening to them was harrowing and disturbing. But the bottom line is that he was convicted of a range of charges, and he's probably going to be in prison for the rest of his life.
Yeah, important not to overlook how difficult it was for them and how brave it is for them to come forward. And following that verdict, we know Kelly's attorney actually said that prosecutors had overblown this case. Do we think there's going to be an appeal here?
Likely. The defense attorneys tried to make the case that Kelly himself was a victim of sexual abuse when he was a young person, that he dropped out of high school, that he's illiterate, that he was manipulated by all these people who were his managers and others and accountants. But remember, he was a mega musical superstar. And during his time, there was no one bigger. He performed at the Olympics. He was multiple Grammy winner, the Pied Piper of R&B, as he was called. And now we have 2 juries who essentially have not bought this, oh, poor me defense that the defense tried to raise for R. Kelly. Listening to the testimony and to the stories that these women were telling was just incredible. It was horrific. There have been a number of high-profile cases of sexual abuse by celebrities, Bill Cosby, Harvey Weinstein. And there are some advocates out there who say that R. Kelly's case is the worst of them all in some ways, given the depravity, given what he did to these women. It wasn't just sexual abuse, it was violence, it was cruelty, prosecutors said. There were all kinds of very strong language used to describe what he was doing to these women. And again, now he's going to be in prison probably for the rest of his life.
Disturbing and so difficult to listen to there in the courtroom. And we know, looking forward, Kelly still facing 2 other sexual misconduct trials and also the sentencing. What can we expect?
There are state charges pending in Chicago and Illinois and in Minnesota. And there's now some question about whether these prosecutors will go forward with these cases, given the fact that he has been convicted in these federal cases. The judge yesterday did not announce a date for sentencing. Sentencing will probably come in several weeks, if not a couple of months, in the Chicago case, the Illinois case. And he faces a minimum of 10 years and up to 90 years, given the convictions yesterday, on top of 30 years. So do the math. He's done.
Yeah, a long time ahead of him. All right, Ron Allen, thanks so much.
And a new documentary is shining light on the tumultuous days when U.S. troops were pulled from Afghanistan just over 1 year ago. America's longest war lasted 20 years, costing the U.S. nearly $2 trillion. 2,461 soldiers were killed as a result. But the toll was just as severe for Afghanistan. More than 47,000 Afghanistan civilians died during the war, along with over 66,000 military personnel. The film Escape from Kabul uses never-before-seen footage during the withdrawal to paint a bigger picture of just what transpired during the historic period.
We're ending America's longest war.
20 years. It's obviously not a success.
We knew we were there to evacuate the at-risk Afghans, the U.S. citizens.
They kind of made it sound like, oh, it's going to be quick and simple. We're going to be in and out. But that didn't happen here.
You need to back up. Push back. Push back. Push back.
Jamie Roberts, the director and producer of Escape from Kabul, joins us now. Jamie, good morning. Good to see you. Just seeing 30 seconds of that footage is chilling. Completing a film is no small feat, so congrats on that. And I know that the production team spent 10 months on the ground conducting interviews and gathering that footage, some of which we just saw. What were some of the moments that stood out to you? What kind of lasting impact did you see this war have on people still in Afghanistan?
Hi, Sinclair. Yeah, I think when I first got to Kabul, the city is full of Taliban driving ANA tanks, Humvees, holding machine guns that were all funded pretty much by NATO and American forces. So that's the first thing that really hits you, is that now you have the Taliban in complete control, and they're very well equipped with U.S. high-tech machinery. And secondly, I think, we spent a long time trying to get access to the Taliban that were there on the ground when the evacuation happened, who were facing the U.S. Marines and the other soldiers that were there. And I think one particular interview with a Taliban suicide commander was the most impactful, and that's in the film. He was quite an incredible character and terrifying.
What did that Taliban suicide commander tell you?
He told me that it was like a dream when he came in. For them, it was complete victory. This was them banishing the Americans and the NATO forces after losing many of their fellow Talibs in war. They were extremely proud, and now they're looking forward to take over the country and have complete control.
And I know you also directed 4 Hours at the Capitol, which examines events that took place during the January 6th attack. Why is it important for you to take a magnifying glass to these major controversial moments? What's your approach? What do you want viewers to take away?
We want to really, the idea is to look deeply, with a deep focus on an issue like this. And with the Capitol, the same. There's a news cycle with great journalism that happens, but quite often, as happening in the world right now, new events happen. So the news cycle goes on. Whereas, Afghanistan, the war was 20 years long, $2 trillion spent. It's important to examine what happened and also what the situation is now, because Afghans are still stuck there. There's no U.S. Embassy presence in the country. Al-Qaeda leader has just been droned by America there. The situation still hangs in the balance. It's not going away, even though maybe we're looking at other things like Ukraine, like Taiwan. So really, we want to examine these events and see what we can learn from them.
Absolutely. It's important we don't turn away from them. Jamie Roberts, thank you so much. And for all you viewers, Escape from Kabul will be available to stream on HBO Max starting September 21st. And coming up, a city in crisis. After the break here on Morning News Now, I'll take you to Jackson, Mississippi, where clean, drinkable water is a precious commodity, and why historians say the problem actually dates back decades.
Plus, Patagonia's promise, the founder of one of the biggest outdoor retailers giving his billion-dollar business away. The major move that's making a statement in the corporate world. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Now to the billionaire founder of a major outdoor retailer who is redefining corporate leadership with his decision to just give away his entire company, all to help fight climate change. NBC News correspondent Emily Ikeda has that story.
Behind the world-renowned company famous for outdoor clothing and gear is 83-year-old Yvon Chouinard, a climber, surfer, and lifelong environmentalist who just gave away his estimated $3 billion business born from blacksmithing in a shed. His family transferred ownership of Patagonia to a trust and nonprofit organization created to funnel all of the apparel company's profits to fight climate change and defend nature. Instead of going public, you could say we're going purpose, Chouinard wrote in a public letter. Instead of extracting value from nature and transforming it into wealth for investors, we'll use the wealth Patagonia creates to protect the source of all wealth. The reluctant billionaire has never been swayed by business norms, even encouraging consumers to limit their spending at his company.
You've heard of recycle and reuse, stuff like that. You also have to consider refuse.
refuse to buy something just because, if you don't need it, don't buy it.
For decades, he's given away 1% of Patagonia's annual sales to environmental causes.
For me, it's an earth tax. It's a taxing ourselves for being polluters, for using up non-renewable resources.
But the climate advocate says that's no longer enough, writing, "We can save our planet if we commit to it." And that's just what Chenard is doing. Emily Ikeda, NBC News.
More business news now. A TikTok exec says they have an agreement with the U.S. government on how to address privacy concerns.
CNBC's Silvana Henao joins us with more on that. Good morning, Silvana.
Hey guys, good morning. Yeah, so a top executive at TikTok is pushing back against lawmakers grilling the company over its links to China. Vanessa Pappas testified before the Senate Homeland Security Committee yesterday. Pappas is TikTok's chief operating officer. She says the company is committed to the security of its users in the U.S. and is working towards a deal with the federal government to protect their data. Senators from both parties pressed TikTok over potential access Chinese employees have to U.S. data and whether they have ties to the Communist Party. Ford taking the wraps off a new gas-powered Mustang as its muscle car rivals are going electric. The redesigned 2024 Mustang comes in a hardtop and convertible version with 2 gas engines. Ford says it knows customers want an internal combustion engine in the iconic vehicle. Reports say a planned hybrid version was scrapped. And Walmart is launching a virtual fitting room to help shoppers see how clothes would look on them. Walmart rolled out a beta version of the tool back in March, letting customers choose a model that resembles them in body type, skin tone, and hair color. They can also choose from more than 270,000 items from Walmart's private brands, national brands like Levi's, Hanes, and Champion, and even clothes sold on its third-party marketplace, guys. Sounds pretty cool, right?
Yeah, very cool.
I love seeing how inclusive fashion companies are getting. It's exciting.
And if I can avoid a fitting room, I'm all for it.
Next, they need to tackle the difference between fitting room lighting and real-world lighting.
Oh,
yes, absolutely.
All right, Silvana, thanks so much.
You got it.
And turning now to the ongoing water crisis that's plaguing residents in Jackson, Mississippi. The EPA now looking into the city's water system after a boil water advisory was put in place over a month ago. But historians and residents say the issue is not new.
So I will be going scavenging for water today.
Deborah Bell is a Jackson, Mississippi native. We met her at a water distribution event.
That's what I do. I have to buy water.
Bell organizes most of her day around water, like many of Jackson's more than 150,000 residents. A boil water advisory up since July 30th. Still in effect nearly 2 months later. Deadly storms and flash flooding leaving households without running water. And while water pressure has returned, the water itself remains largely non-potable. Now, the Environmental Protection Agency has launched an inquiry into the water crisis, a probe into funding for and oversight over the water system. And while the government looks into just what went wrong, Jackson's residents are left going through extreme measures to keep their drinking water safe.
This is just water that I accumulated this week. This water here, I boiled it last night. It's ready to use for my cooking for today. Nothing but hot water, and then let it cool off so you can get you a bath.
Lifelong resident Bell says the issue is not new.
So this water has been contaminated for decades. The pipes has always been that way.
It's a problem historians like Dr. Robert Luckett say is rooted in white flight out of the city.
And I would pinpoint it really to 1969 to 1970. The Supreme Court declares that desegregation of public schools must begin immediately.
Luckett says as white people left the city, so too did investments in the city's infrastructure. Jackson, today, with a black population over 80%, and nearly a quarter of its residents living below the poverty line.
The thing about the water system in the city of Jackson is that our system of pipes below the city are over 100 years old. Most of them are lead. the entire system needs to be replaced.
The Mississippi Health Department tells NBC there is not an estimate on when the boil water notice will be lifted. The mayor of Jackson saying in a press conference,
"We are in an ongoing state of emergency, even when we're not facing a boil water notice."
All while residents continue living through a sobering reality.
You got a choice between water, gas, food. What? It brings tears to my eyes to know that somebody may have gotten sick from drinking that water.
And it's important to note that the city's watchdog probe is still ongoing. And while Jackson waits for those results to be released, Mississippi Senator Cindy Hyde-Smith is asking the Biden administration to include the Jackson water crisis in an upcoming emergency spending bill as residents continue to be under a boil water advisory.
Such important coverage. Thanks for bringing that to us, and Clay.
Welcome back. The highly anticipated return of Taco Bell's cult classic, the Mexican pizza, is finally here. But that is not the only thing Taco Bell has up its sleeve, or shell. Over 100,000 people signed a petition to bring back the fan favorite, and to celebrate its permanent relaunch, Taco Bell is releasing Mexican Pizza, the musical. I'm serious, the musical, not a joke. And it's starring Doja Cat and Dolly Parton. Yes, Doja and Dolly. And you can binge it starting today. In a press release, Taco Bell described it as, quote, a satirical musical about the harrowing story of those who fought to bring back the Mexican pizza. The musical will debut on TikTok, yes, TikTok, at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard. So, Stephen, if you need me at 8 p.m. Eastern, I will be glued to my phone.
I know where you'll be. I love that they have to say it's satirical, like we weren't going to already figure that part out.
2022, I guess, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, let's end this hour with an amazing story here. A stranger's act of kindness. A Texas man going under the knife, giving away over half of his liver to someone he didn't even know, all in an effort to save that man's life. NBC's Tom Giannis has that story.
On February 11th of this year, the Wordle answer of the day stood out to Randy Staples, who plays the online game every day. It's because he had a life-altering decision in front of him.
The Wordle of the day for you is amaze. And what's about to happen in 9 days is amazing. Just think about it. My portion of my liver is going to go into another person to save that person's life.
Randy was originally approved as a liver donor for a close friend, but after that friend suddenly passed away, Randy still felt he could help someone else.
So I just knew that I needed to continue. If I could save another human's life, I wanted to.
So Randy decided to move forward with his organ donation, giving away more than half of his liver to a complete stranger.
I'm almost certain this is the first one that's been done in North Texas where the donor and the recipient did not know each other.
That surgery, a success. Randy spent months in recovery, waiting to meet his transplant recipient.
To me, that meeting is going to be amazing, you know, just to know that I saved somebody's life.
That meeting finally happened this August.
Are they here yet? Yes. Okay.
Randy meeting his liver recipient, Lee Hatcher, for the first time in this emotional moment. Both men happy, but more importantly, in this case, healthy.
Yeah, everything's wonderful.
Randy, remember, he's an avid Wordle player, describing the relationship over text.
The text chain we got going. The text feed is called chopped liver, and then Lee is just a sliver. I did that because it rhymes, but in reality, he took a chunk.
The pair showing off these liver transplant t-shirts inspired by Wordle, but for Lee, there's only one word to use how he feels, and it doesn't fit in a 5-letter box.
Oh, I'm grateful. It's my blood brother, grateful, very grateful.
Wow. Hard not to be emotional over something like that. Our thanks to Tom Giannis for that incredible story.
Really beautiful.
Yeah, I love that. And that does it for this hour of Morning News Now.
The news continues right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.